When I was young, I heard many adults.
Give me the mic.
Like that? All right. Is that better? Can everyone hear me now? All right. We'll try that again. When I was a little boy, I heard a plethora of adults tell me, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Now, I understood the reasoning for the rule. You didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But that rule, it morphs into something larger in our society. It morphs into what we call pleasantries. We expect a smile in return when we smile at someone. We say hello and ask how is it going to a stranger when we walk by, even though we can't even hear the response because we've walked away. As a society, we assume that everyone around us is having a pleasant day and demand that at the least, they don't burden us with any reality besides that. This controls the amount of negativity that we're confronted with. And being pleasant is something we expect from good people. However, is it anything more than a front? Does this actually make a person good? When I was living in Israel, I thought about this a lot because, you see, you can't expect all Israelis to stop and smile and exchange pleasantries. In fact, one Israeli told me, as Americans, you're lying when you walk around smiling. It's impossible that you're always having a good day. She continued that it actually causes more frustration for everyone. You see, in Israel, if you're in a bad mood and you walk around with a frown, nobody bothers you because you're in a bad mood. But effectively, that allows everyone else to care for you by leaving you alone. Does not caring about the pleasantries mean that Israelis weren't good people? I think it's more about what the criteria is for what makes a good person. It's based on core qualities, your actions, your drive, not merely small talk. I learned that in that very moment, it isn't easy to be a good person, and quite frankly, it shouldn't be easy. In a speech called This Is Water, David Foster Wallace touches on this topic. He says, imagine that you're frustrated at a checkout line after a long day. You can be annoyed that you have to wait as people take way too long to check out, talk loudly on their phones, and some guy behind you is coughing up a lung. Or you can consider the likelihood that everyone else in the supermarket checkout line is as bored and frustrated as you are, and that some of those people actually have harder, more tedious, and painful lives than we do. David Foster Wallace eloquently points out a major error that we get caught up in day to day with our lives. We begin to only accept the way in which we view the world, frustrated with how others interfere with that perception. We forget to consider that they have a life outside the interaction we have. Being a good person with a positive outlook is a crucial component of creating a better world. If we were negative all the time, it would slowly begin to corrupt our society and leave us without hope. However, our tradition doesn't suggest that repairing the world is as simple as being positive. You can't just put a smile on. Rather, our tradition points to the core values that make up a good person. And the two that I find most relevant in this time are patience and tolerance. These are fundamental concepts for being a good person. Without patience and without tolerance, we would not have the means to accept those who are different from ourselves. Without patience and tolerance, we would only surround ourselves with people who think just like us. And that would stifle progress, and collaboration would be nothing more. What is fascinating about both patience, in Hebrew, savlanut, and tolerance, sovlanut, is that they come from the same Hebrew root, samech bet lamed, which means to suffer. The infinitive form of the word lahistavel literally means to cause yourself to suffer. To be patient and to be tolerant, you're going to suffer internally. We will face hardships. And in the most basic terms, we all need to sacrifice a little bit for the greater good. The Museum of Tolerance defines tolerance in two different ways that build upon each other. First, it's a fair, objective attitude towards those whose opinions and practices are different from our own. The second is the commitment to respect human dignity. They explain that the two levels of the definitions are because the concept of tolerance covers a lot of ground. Attitudes as well as actions, individual choices as well as social, political, and legal commitments. It's also a vision that encompasses everybody. Every person is a purveyor and a beneficiary of tolerance. That first definition is how we can interact with those we disagree with. And the latter is a mindset, how we can value people, especially those who are different from us. And as Jews, we learn to think this way through a tradition of, well, suffering. During the high holidays, we are not strangers to suffering. Next week's fast alone is enough to prove to the rest of the world that we understand suffering. Not eating all day long and staying in synagogue all day long. We have built a cultural persona around the embracement of suffering. It's a major part of our narrative. One thing worth noticing is that tradition does not include suffering without reason. There's always a purpose to facing hardships. Many of the holidays are built around collective moments of suffering, providing a space for inner reflection that is much needed. One traditional understanding of suffering is the servant model of the prophet Isaiah, which suggests that the Jewish people suffer in order to redeem the wicked of humanity. Saadia Gaon, a 9th century philosopher, explains that suffering in that God causes us to suffer for our own good. What we perceive as evil is actually beneficial. What if it's not about large-scale suffering, but rather about individualized moments of hardship in this case? In the book of Exodus, the Pharaoh's daughter sees a baby floating down the river and cannot help but provide for the child. We need to remember is how drastically that one moment changed her entire life, her entire family's life, when they welcomed this little boy, Moses. The responsibility that she accepted in discovering this helpless baby transforms into a lifetime of trials and tribulations about parenting. She could have simply let Moses float down the river, right? Our tradition says that's not an option. When we see injustice, when we see suffering, we cannot merely recognize it and go about our lives. It demands a call to action. Emmanuel Levinas is a 12th century French Jewish philosopher who believed that seeing the suffering in another human face compels us to act. He writes that there is no turning back from it, and there is no asking for something in return. That to do something for someone else is the basis of humanity. The relationship that is formed between him and another is justice. Levinas believed that in helping the other, in saving them from suffering, that they have the potential to understand God through the relationship. That tolerance and patience for the other is the only way to discover God. This literally makes tolerance a divine act, which only further explains why it shouldn't be easy. Whether this be a social justice, treating others with kindness, or as simple as giving tzedakah, for Levinas, it's an internal suffering caused by witnessing the suffering of others that moves him to action. Social justice is that demanded action. Great work is being done across the nation by Jews and non-Jews alike, attending protests, building bridges, speaking out for those whose voices aren't heard. However, with tolerance and patience for those who we disagree with, the social action, without it, would turn hostile or aggressive in itself. Without tolerance, those who are fighting for injustice would create new divides and prolong hardships for others. Even in the holy work of Tikkun Olam, we have to actively be practicing that patience and tolerance. When we do social action, it's not convenient. We miss opportunities. We are not met with the level of gratitude we may want. And the change that we fight for is incredibly slow. Being a good person in that action is not easy, but making the world a better place is certainly fair as a payout for suffering. When being done right, tzedakah is that perfect symbolism. Traditionally, we're obligated to give a percentage of our earnings to those in need. We all work hard for what we earn, and it takes great strength and certainly some hardship to give up a sizable percentage of that money. However, helping those in need is actually a statement of tolerance. Even though someone is less fortunate financially than you, they are equally important in our society, and no voice should be diminished for financial reasons. Much like tzedakah, patience should not be an overwhelming sacrifice. You give what you can handle while still taking care of yourself. That's what allows the patience and tolerance. We hear the voices we don't always want to hear because this is how we show people that they are valued, even when we don't value what they're saying. Since we're all made b'tselem Elohim, in God's image, we can't assess the value of an individual. We can only assess the value of their words. Now, one has to turn these values internally before they're effective externally. We have to be patient and tolerant with our own growth, with our inadequacies, with our failures. If we don't, we won't have the capacity to do for others. Think about it like working out. To see results, you have to be consistent. And if your workouts are like my workouts, you're suffering the entire time. You won't see results that day or even the next day or maybe for a few weeks. However, having patience to wait for the results and continuing to tolerate the workout, eventually you'll see a difference. In the Mishnah, there's a story of Honi the circle maker, a great example of suffering on behalf of the general well-being. The people are worried about a lack of rain. Without the rain, the crops will die. And when the drought becomes too extreme, Honi draws a circle on the ground and stands within it and begins to plead with God. He refuses to leave until God provides water. He literally suffers, standing in a tiny circle for days for the greater good. Honi's audacious action, withstanding the hardship, shows how all-encompassing being a good person actually is. We need to find our place to draw that circle and push ourselves to have the patience of Honi, especially if we draw that circle in response to something crucial and meaningful in the world around us. With our current political divides, having patience for those who don't see exactly like us is hard but necessary. If we can't even hear someone else speak, then we are also adding to the breakdown of society. We can't be totally intolerant to others having an opinion. Again, I don't need to respect the opinion of someone to treat them with decency. I need to hear them out. I don't have to pretend to agree. I have to show kindness and civility when I tell them I disagree. Last week, there was a rally in support of President Trump called the Mother of All Rallies. Right? The rally was to end political violence. The organizers stated that what makes America so great is the ability for free speech to end in speech and not in fistfights. And to address this, the organizers invited some of the Black Lives Matter activists who were standing on the side to come up and speak. The organizer took the mic and said, "So you guys know that this is the mother of all rallies. And it was to end political violence," he says. "It's about freedom of speech. It's about celebration. So what we're going to do is something that he didn't think the activists were used to. He gave them 2 minutes of their own platform to put out their message. And whether they disagree or agree with the message is irrelevant. That the group was going to listen because they have the right to have their message." So the representatives spoke freely. To be sure, the crowd did not accept everything that he said. And they booed and they yelled. They yelled expletives. Some yelled, "All lives matter." Others turned around to pretend they weren't listening. But there were also moments when the crowd accepted the activist's message. He spoke incredibly candidly and without hesitation. And when his 2 minutes ended, he ended with a message of unity. If we really want America to be great, we do it together. And both the crowd and the protester chanted, "USA, USA." Now remember, these groups do not agree on very much at all. The activists they are protesting this rally. Their exchange was certainly a proof of tolerance and patience because I can guarantee both sides suffered to an extent that day. Neither side began the day expecting to exchange ideas. The activists were met with animosity. Certainly, there were no pleasantries for them as rally attendees walked past them. And for those attending the rally, they certainly felt attacked for some of their views. Everybody basked in awkward discomfort together. and it was an important first step in repairing an extremely fragmented society. We must remember, it is possible to tolerate or accept someone without understanding them. Being a good person is difficult, and in today's increasingly hostile environment, it can feel relentless, I know. But it is necessary to be a good person to the core, because that's what's needed. I'm not perfect. I have many moments of weakness in which my tolerance and patience lapse. I have days where I'm selfish, days where I'm impatient, and days where I'm disconnected from the world around us. However, as we go through the holidays and the Yamim Noraim between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we can address this within ourselves and work harder to allow for some inconvenient hardships and accept internal suffering. Being a good person will never be easy, and it isn't something you can get credit for now and stop doing later. It's difficult, it's tedious, it's challenging, it's a stressful endeavor that no one should undervalue. Let's not accept the idea that being a good person is a walk in the park. Let's recognize that like anything else in life we work hard for, we have to consistently be improving our efforts. It's crucial for the well-being of our entire society that we face the struggle, because being a good person means looking out for others. And if everyone was doing that, no one would go uncared for. We all need to accept the internal suffering of lahistavel and embrace that value of savlanut, showing patience for others. And together, we can bring our community one step closer to God.